Hey, what's up champs, 104 Maverick checking in with another video. This time I'm going to teach you guys how to land a Black Hawk using a few different approaches. We'll look at a straight in approach, a decelerating turn, and a slick side slip landing, like a boss. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright brothers and sisters, let's cover the straight in landing first of all. Now this is a great landing to use if we're coming in to land somewhere where we have lots of space available and no major obstacles to avoid on the way in. So in this example, we're landing at an airbase with lots of room. This is by far the safest way to land the aircraft, and it's what I recommend you start with if you're new to flying helicopters in DCS or if you're new to the Black Hawk. There are a couple of downsides to using this landing style in combat however, especially if you try and use it in a confined area. The biggest issue is the forward visibility when slowing down. Because we need to raise the nose relatively high to decelerate, it obstructs our forward visibility and makes it very difficult to navigate around obstacles that are between us and our landing zone. Now just to clarify something here, we're coming at these landings from the perspective of either landing under fire in a hot LZ or landing somewhere that the enemy has a presence in, and as a result we want to be as fast as possible in and out while also keeping the aircraft as low as we can to minimise the risks to ourselves and our crew. You can use the straight in approach method to safely land in a confined area that is not contested by the enemy. If you start at a higher altitude and then slowly bleed your height down, but in this example, we want to imagine that the enemy is nearby and we want to stay relatively low to avoid getting shot in the face. Alright, I've turned on the control overlay in the top left hand side of the screen for you guys, and what we're going to do is walk through the landing stage by stage. Now this might be a bit basic for those of you that have experience in doing this, but for the people that are new to the aircraft that don't know what to expect, I think this will really help out a lot. So here we are approaching the runway, more or less straight and level, and our aim is to land halfway down the runway on the centre line. Our planned deceleration point is just above the runway numbers, so as we pass over that, keep an eye on the controls overlay. Now notice just before we decelerate where our cyclic or our stick position is. We are pushing forward on the cyclic to maintain our forward momentum. Passing over the numbers now, we're going to start smoothly taking off collective power. This is going to reduce the thrust coming off the blades, and as a result, the aircraft is going to start to sink. So we want to move the cyclic aft, back towards the centre position to manage that altitude loss in a controlled manner by lifting the nose up. We will require some left cyclic initially as we reduce the collective to counter the aircraft's roll to the right. As the collective power gets lower, that then briefly switches to right cyclic to counter the aircraft now wanting to roll to the left. However, as we decelerate through between 100 to 80 knots, we will then need to go back to left cyclic bias as the aircraft will be trying to roll to the right as we bring that collective power back in. Now it's never a good idea to totally dump the collective all the way to idle. It's not catastrophic, however, if you don't have a lot of practice, it can quickly lead to your downfall. Instead, we only want to reduce the collective to around 25 to 20% and then manage our deceleration from there. As the aircraft gets slower, we will then need to start adding collective power on to avoid crashing. This is where a lot of people who don't understand how helicopters work go wrong and end up hitting the ground. It is not good enough to simply start pulling back on the cyclic to maintain altitude once our airspeed gets below a certain point, somewhere roughly around 60 knots. At this point we lose something called ETL, which stands for Effective Translational Lift. Now I won't go too deep into the physics of this here, but essentially you can think about ETL as getting extra lift from the rotor blades above a certain speed, which is usually between 50 and 60 knots. When we go below that speed, we require a lot more power to stay in the air, as we no longer have the extra lift from the rotor blades. So you'll notice that as the speed gets lower, our collective power gets higher, and as a result of that, we need more left cyclic bias to counter the aircraft wanting to roll to the right. Another thing that you'll notice is that as the speed gets below 50 knots, we need to start adding in some torque pedal, aka rudder pedal. Above 50 knots, there is enough airflow passing down either side of the aircraft to keep us pointing in the same direction. As we lose that airflow, the aircraft wants the torque turned to the right to counter the spin from the rotor blades. So as the aircraft slows down, we need to be ready to start to apply that left pedal to manage our nose position. Now for the touchdown itself, you can see here that we don't need to flare. We maintain our nose up attitude until the tail wheel touches the ground, then we gently transition the main gear onto the ground. To do this, we don't need to make any major power changes to the collective or forward cyclic inputs. One thing to remember when flying helicopters is that if the nose of the aircraft is up, we are always going to be slowing down. So when landing like this, to transition to all wheels on the deck, we just need to hold our attitude and the aircraft will gently settle onto the runway, providing we touch down with the tail wheel at a slow enough speed. Now here is the most important thing to remember when landing the Black Hawk, guys. You must maintain left cyclic bias until the aircraft is completely stable on the ground. I've seen so many people lose their rotor blades or roll the aircraft completely when trying to land because they don't do this. Remember, the more collective power we apply to the aircraft, the more left cyclic we need to counter the aircraft wanting to roll to the right. So at the point of landing, where we have lots of power on to keep us in the air, we need lots of left bias on the cyclic to avoid rolling over once the tail wheel touches down. Also keep in mind, just because we're on the ground doesn't mean we stop flying the aircraft. Once you have all three wheels on the ground, maintain your cyclic position and then gently start to lower the collective and center the cyclic, or you're going to get yourself in trouble. Alright guys, I know you want the goodies, so let's get to the goodie room. We've covered the basics, so let's move on. Next, let's learn how to do this decelerating turn with a transition into a straight landing. Okay, so a lot of what we covered in the basics are going to be a feature here also. We're still going to lower the collective to slow down, and we're still going to need a lot of left bias on the cyclic during the final stage of the approach. What is going to be massively different is the amount of torque pedal that we use very early on in the approach, and the amount of work we have to do on the cyclic during our deceleration. Landing like this takes a lot of practice, so please don't expect to be able to do this on your first attempt. There are a lot of inputs you need to make very quickly to maintain the smoothness of the deceleration. However, with some time and effort, you will be able to do this. So let's take a quick look at this uninterrupted clip, and then we'll break it down stage by stage. Okay, so right from the start you'll notice that we're much lower than the straight in landing example. We're going to try and maintain this low altitude during our deceleration and do our best not to allow the aircraft to balloon up and climb, which could potentially expose us to the enemy. Using this landing technique is a great way of slowing down at very low level while having good forward visibility in your direction of travel. So it's a great skill to learn if you plan on landing in hot LZs or anywhere that the enemy might be close to. Okay, so here we are barreling down the side of the runway towards our landing zone. Now a good rough visual aid for when to begin your deceleration is when your LZ passes just inside the window wiper on the right hand side of the cockpit. Now I want to emphasise though that this is just a very rough visual aid. and you can start the manoeuvre before it to make it easier when you're beginning to learn this procedure. Alright, the first things we do is start working all three controls at the same time. We want to simultaneously start to lower the collective at the same time as committing to full power pedal to the left and begin to bank the aircraft into a left-hand turn using the cyclic. We do this to present as much of the aircraft body as possible into the oncoming airflow, which will massively increase our drag and the rate at which we slow down. You can see here that we are full pedal left and continuing to slowly reduce the collective to stop the aircraft from climbing. And most importantly, we are keeping our nose down, pointing below the horizon. All this is stopping the aircraft from climbing up, which is what it's desperately trying to do because our energy state is so high. Now remember what I said in the previous example about as long as our nose is pointing up, the aircraft will slow down. Well, now we're trying to slow the aircraft down while keeping the nose down instead of up. So that takes a lot of extra work on the cyclic and pedals to keep sliding the aircraft into the turn to generate as much drag as possible. At a certain point, around about 100 knots, you're going to notice that with full power pedal, the aircraft is now able to overcome the force of the air hitting it, and the tail will start to over-rotate around to the left. This is the part where we need to start gently coming off the power pedal slightly to control our nose position. The aim here is to get our nose pointing roughly at the landing zone and then keep it there, so we need to adjust power pedal accordingly to do this. Shortly after this point, we need to become very aware that if we keep pointing our nose down, eventually we're going to start speeding up again as we increase collective power during the slowdown. So once we get the aircraft below 50 knots and we lose the benefit of effective translational lift, we need to start slowly lifting the nose as we increase collective to stop us from crashing into the ground. Now if you're watching the cyclic inputs, you might be thinking, holy smokes Batman, that's a lot of inputs. Well, yeah, I'm afraid it is. You're going to have to be prepared to do a lot of work very quickly to maintain control of the aircraft and ensure that you are flying the aircraft and the aircraft is not flying you. If you're not good at this to start off with, don't worry. Experience and practice will make this easier. Sadly, there's no guidelines I can give you that will enable you to nail the cyclic inputs using a methodical procedure. You just have to be able to react quickly to what the aircraft is doing and what your eyes are telling you is happening, and then make the correct inputs to stay in control. Again, this will come with practice, so don't worry if you're not Tom Cruise right out the box. The feel will come to you after some stick time and some hard work. If you're struggling with this part, I advise you to watch this section over and over again a few times and really focus on my cyclic inputs. Then re-watch what the aircraft is doing before and after the cyclic inputs I'm doing so that you get to understand why what I'm doing is working and why I remain in control of the aircraft the entire time. So just a quick recap on our goals during the decel. We want to slow down without ballooning in height, maintain our nose pointing at the landing zone while constantly turning to present the side of the aircraft into the airflow. Now this last bit here is a little bit tricky. Remember, we want to keep our nose pointing at the LZ, however there's going to come a certain point where if we keep turning the aircraft left, we're going to rotate away from the landing zone. So our aim here is to work the turn so as we slow right down to approach the landing, we are facing straight in towards our touchdown point with no lateral movement left or right, only forward. Now here's the part where you need to be very careful. To do the final part of the decel to land, there is a natural tendency to reduce the collective as we bring the nose up and do a rolling landing. But we need to fight that temptation and instead increase collective slightly to act as reverse thrust to slow us down that final stage so we can do a vertical landing. By increasing the collective, this will stop us from touching the tail down too early and will result in a nice safe deceleration as we enter the LZ. This is something that I personally found the hardest part to pull off. It is very easy to just give in to temptation and go for a rolling landing instead of doing a vertical one, and rolling landings are okay and they definitely have their place, but it is far better to practice this manoeuvre to a full stop vertical transition so that you have more control over the aircraft, so that you can safely land in places where rolling landings are not permissive. Now last but no means least, let's take a look at how to do the side slip all the way onto the landing point. Now essentially this is almost identical to the last one, with just a little twist at the very end. We start off working all three controls to slow the aircraft down as we did previously. So we're left on the side click, full left pedal, and we're reducing the collective. Then we work on getting our nose pointing at the LZ and lock it onto that position. However, the next step is at the point I mentioned in the last example, when I said that if we keep turning the aircraft the nose is going to go past the touchdown point, we actually want to continue with that turn and instead make a gentle transition from pointing our nose at the touchdown point to pointing our side window at the touchdown point. As we do this, we want to simultaneously start to bank the aircraft slightly more to the left to act as our final braking mechanism, and we prepare for a quick little overbank right at the end to stop dead. Doing this in combination with raising the collective sends all our thrust out to the side of the aircraft in the direction that we're travelling in, and that starts to slow us down. It's exactly like coming into land on the straight in approach and lifting the nose and applying the collective to slow down. However, this time, because we're flying sideways, instead of lifting the nose, we are lifting the side of the aircraft up that is facing our direction of travel, and that gives us the exact same effect as if we were slowing down straight with the nose coming up. Helicopters are just great like that. With a little practice, you learn to get the timing just right so you complete the final stop manoeuvre right over your intended landing point. As you can see though, there is a lot of inputs that need to be made to get to that point correctly. We are working hard on all three control surfaces, and most importantly, we're thinking ahead and we're predicting how the aircraft is going to react to our inputs and where the aircraft is going to be a couple of seconds in the future from our present position. It is a little bit fiddly to get right, even with the Black Hawk and its forgiving flight model, so it does take a bit of practice to get it nailed down, but it's by far the most satisfying way to land the aircraft, and once you're on top of it, it's a great feeling when you pull it off. Alright guys, I hope that helps and you enjoyed watching the video. Although the Black Hawk is just a mod in DCS and not a full fidelity module, it is still great fun to fly, and I for one really hope we get to see a full up module of it one day. If you don't already have it, it's well worth checking out, and I'll leave a link in the description for where you can download it and try it out for free. If you did enjoy the video or found it useful, please do me a massive favour and hit that like button guys, as it really helps to grow the channel, and also subscribe if you're not already a subscriber to stay up to date with future videos. One of which will be me teaching you guys how to land the Apache like this. Top Gun and volleyball, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not Scott Manley. Fly safe.